Welcome back into TH100 Introduction to Systematic Theology as we continue to look at we look at theology and philosophy. Where we left off in our last session, we were talking about existentialism, if you remember that, okay? And we were in this fourth final point is where we were talking about, and I want to go back there just for a brief moment because we were talking about objective truth and subjective truth. Objective truth and subjective truth. Okay? And there have been many types of various effects, if you will, okay, of this existentializing of theology. And this has been the impact, and you see this in all kinds of churches today. It's an amazing thing that 150 years, 200 years later, you're still seeing the major impact of this kind of philosophy in churches. So you have Bible study groups that say things like this. What do you think this Bible verse means to you? It's just absolutely amazing to me, okay? And then you have the whole name it and claim it group of people, okay, in this whole movement. Well, this is where they draw this out of, because they have a philosophical base for their theology, and it's called existentialism. Now, what have been the effects of this? And we're picking this up right from where we left off in our last session. Right? So it's really important that you have your notes and really important that you follow through on the previous teaching sessions. Look, first is the subjectivizing of truth. That's very common today. And I understand why that happens in the culture. I understand why it happens in the world, and I understand why you hear, in fact, news reporters, your TV news and all that, these people are experts at doing this. But what is more shocking to me is how many pastors do this in the pulpit. That's what's shocking to me. Look, truth is truth when it becomes truth for me. That's the banner. Truth is truth when it becomes truth for me. What? Again, I know why the world does that. But you, pastor, preacher? Man, why don't you just resign? Why don't you just step back from the pulpit, step down from the platform, and step out of the church and go sell newspapers? Because how can you come up with how can you take an objective truth, the Word of God, and say, well, truth is truth when it's truth for me? That's what existentialism has done to the church. And we're seeing this it's becoming more and more common. It's not to be a thought of as truth is never to be thought of as an objective set of propositions. It's never. This is like deconstruction. Okay? It must be assimilated by someone if it is to be regarded as truth. Well, let me see if I get this straight. God said, "Thou shalt not kill." But I really haven't assimilated that truth into my life yet. So I have permission to murder. Really? I mean, just think about how ridiculous this sounds. But yet it's been embraced by many. Second thing is what we call the separation. Second is the separation of religious truth from more objective types of truth in general. And so, unlike these other types of truth, revelation does not come through general culture. Let's be clear about that, okay? It just doesn't come, okay? It's, we're talking about the Word of God. Okay? And then third, the result of existentializing of theology is a non-substantive or non-essentialist view of religious reality. What did you just say? This truth and sin, and salvation are really not, what they're saying is that truth and sin are really not subjective. I mean, they're really not fixed substances. These things, they're organic, they kind of move, depend the generation, the age, the culture. What's sin in one culture may not be sin in another culture. What's true in one culture may not be true in another culture. Okay, is that truth and sin? Now specifically, truth and sin is not fixed substances. It's not objective. It's subjective. Okay, and so what they say is that these blocks of reality are negotiable. They're really negotiable. Okay? And they are dynamic occurrences, and you got to understand the reason why something occurs. That's what you have, okay? You get this thing like, for example, I live in South America now, right? After all these years living in North America. And in the news, they had a young boy who, he robbed this person and he killed the person and for his money. And his defense was, well, I had a need. And so the lawyers defended him on the basis that his need, okay, subjected truth. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, okay? And it subjected that truth, okay? You shouldn't kill, you shouldn't steal, right? Okay? You shouldn't harm from your neighbor, okay? And subjected that truth to the basis of need. And the boy was acquitted, but the man is still dead. This is what goes on with this kind of existential kind of thinking, okay? Look, there are motives in existentialism, okay, that parallel biblical Christianity and hence have re-emphasized the themes, okay, sometimes neglected. Now, but these include like the nature of the Christian faith and truth as matters of what we would call passionate, subjective concern and involvement, freedom, and the necessity of choice. Look, the importance and the uniqueness of individual persons, and paradoxically, right, the absurdity and the despair, okay, to which one is led when viewing life as having no discernible rational pattern. I mean, this insanity has invaded the churches around the world. Now, there are also a bunch of various points of inadequacy within existentialism, which I think they're obvious, right? But I don't want to assume. So let's at least take three things that I think that why this philosophy is inadequate, okay? And you find it within existentialism. Okay? Number one, while the existentialists, okay, distinction between objective evidence for the truth of a tenet and fervency of passion is worth noting, okay? This passion is often nothing more than the anxiety of insecurity and should not be confused, okay? It shouldn't be confused with the inward intensity of a commitment that constitutes the Christian faith. Look, in practice, commitment and action, okay, tend to increase rather than decrease with certainty. So if you are certain, you're going to have passion, commitment, and practice. But if you're uncertain, you're not going to have that. And that's the biggest problem that we find in existentialism. Now, how do you translate that to the life of the church? Well, when we get to the church, we get this crazy idea, well, I don't know if what God said there is true or not. I'm not sure, and since I'm not sure, I don't think I have to obey that. And you got people sitting under this kind of teaching for years and years in the church. The second thing that we find about existentialism, okay, it has difficulty justifying. It has a lot of difficulty justifying the choice of one particular object to which to relate in faith. So it's like a smorgasbord. It's a mixed bag of a lot of things, okay? And if it does not offer a basis for preferring one particular object to the other, it tends to fall into what? Subjectivism, in which the subjective experience becomes the end in of itself. So experience and subjectivism, okay, is a truth unto itself. And so objective truth is really not important. The third area I think that we fail is in existentialism. It really has difficulty supporting its values. That's the funny part about this. It really has problems supporting its values and ethical judgments. Because in the end, it has no values and it has no ethical judgments. They're unethical judgments. Okay? and their corrupt values. But they're not willing to call it that, okay? So if meaning is created by one's own choice, think about this for me. If meaning is created by one's own choice, are not the good and the right, whatever one makes them to be, by one's own choice? So this is where we get the good is called bad and the bad is called good. And your choice, by the way, is always the right one. Just think about this carefully with me. Look. So we have to really wrestle with these issues. And you go, well, but not important. No, but it is, because we live in a world in the 21st century now where you may find yourself in your country, in your culture, in your dialect, in your language, in your tradition. But let me tell you something, your people have spanned the universe through the internet. And all of this is just flooding the homes of believers everywhere, all over the world. Because it's always going to appeal to what? Essentially, what does existentialism, what does it really, existentialism, what does it really appeal to? It appeals to your nature. It appeals to your sinful nature. That's why it feels good. It sounds right to you. Look, on existentialist grounds, okay, helping an old lady across the road or beating her over the head and snatching her handbag might be equally right. Did you hear that? You can either help an old lady cross the street, or you can beat her and steal her purse from her. And for the existentialists, both of them may be right, or may not be. That's the insanity we're in. I want you to consider Sartre's. His inconsistency, okay, when he signed what was called the Algerian Manifesto, okay, and he was talking about a moral stand. This is what makes it even crazier. He was talking about a moral stand that he was urging on others if this was somehow objectively right, okay. Yet on his own existentialist terms, there seems little basis for such an action. And so what you have is this double talk all the time going on. Right? Then we come to the next area, is we're going to call it analytical philosophy. Analytical philosophy. Now, there has always been, this is the next major area, is analytical philosophy. Now, and you go, well, what's analytical philosophy? Well, let me see if I can help you with this, okay? Analytical, it's also called, analytical philosophy is also called linguistic philosophy. Linguistic philosophy, because this is where the use of language becomes important, okay? And what it is, it's a loosely related set of approaches to philosophical problems, particularly, and where it dominated was in the Anglo-American philosophy. Okay, and this is where it dominated it most. Okay, from the early 20th century, somewhere in that period. Okay, and it emphasizes the study of language and the logical analysis of concepts. Okay, and analytical philosophy is a branch, and it's a tradition of philosophy using analysis, okay, which is popular in the Western world specifically, okay, and particularly in what we would call the Anglosphere, beginning around the turn of the 20th century in the contemporary era, okay, and it continues all the way today into the 21st century, okay, and it was big in the United Kingdom, okay. All over the United Kingdom. It was big. It's big in the United States. It's big in Canada. It's big in Australia. It's big in New Zealand. It's big in Scandinavia. And the majority of the university philosophy departments today identify themselves, okay, as analytical departments. Analytical departments. Right? And this slowly crept into the seminaries. This crept into the seminaries, okay, as distinct departments, But now most of the seminaries today have dovetailed just the courses into the School of Divinities, into their biblical education. But they used to be very distinct, separate departments. And I would say half of the schools still have them as a separate department. Now, so in analytical philosophy, there has always been this element within philosophy concerned with getting the meaning of language. The meaning of language. And now this is crucial, okay? Especially for those of us who do a lot of word studies, in the Hebrew and the Greek in the Bible, okay? So we at first, we understand it and we grasp at least the initial idea that comes with it, why word studies become important. But what they're doing is the meaning of language. Now, and the purpose is to clarify concepts. That's what it is, okay? And it's analyzing what is being said and how it's being said. Now, Socrates, okay, and you know who that guy is, right? In particular, he was noted for this because Socrates became a master at this, okay? And really, he's the guy that a lot of people created this from. Now, he pictured himself as a midwife. This is how Socrates pictured himself, okay? And as a midwife helps to develop a baby from the womb of the mother, okay? This is the picture that he saw himself as, okay? And it was the way that he can explain it best. And so he himself did not give birth, okay, to any of the ideas that we find in analytical philosophy, okay? But what he did instead was that he was to lead others to truth by helping them to discover it. So we get this idea is that let me help you to discover the truth, okay? So let's just fast forward the tape. In the 20th century, okay, and you go, well, brother, you're always stuck in the 20th century. We're in the 21st. No, because nothing changed in the 21st century. And I'm just giving you the background, how we got to where we are today. Now, in the 20th century, right, this particular task, if you will, okay, was taken on by a very serious, systematic fashion, okay, and it was Bertrand. You've heard of Bertrand Russell, right? Bertrand Russell, right? Yeah, now, when I was in college back in the 1970s, okay, in the early 70s, we had to study Bertrand Russell, okay, and G.E. Moore as well. We had to study him, okay, and in particular, they were more the early practitioners of analysis in the modern sense as we know it today. Okay? Now, philosophers in the past had attempted to make all kinds of pronouncements on a variety of subjects. For example, you're going to recognize it. What is right? What is right? What is true? Okay? What is beautiful? And we would get these kind of phrases, okay? And these became huge semester-long courses on college campuses. What is right? What is true? What is beautiful? Behold, beauties in the eyes of the beholder. So you began to see that. You go, oh, now I'm getting a little idea of what you're talking about. Look, in modern times, however, you know what the philosophers have done? Excuse me. They've adopted a much more modest goals. They have modest goals now, okay? And in part, this is because a number of these areas are now the domain of certain, what we would call special sciences. Special sciences, okay? And so we see this thing, okay? And now philosophers focus instead on the meaning of language, okay? The clarification, the illumination of the goals of language, and the means by which it achieves these goals comprise the task of philosophy, right? Which is the reason why communication is so crucial. Right? Instead of having some special subject matter, okay, philosophy is more concerned with the subject matter of all of the various disciplines, but they do so in a very special way. It deals with the languages of ethics, It deals with the languages of science. It deals with the languages of religion, examining how it functions and how it signifies, what it means and what it represents. Okay? typical questions with philosophy, with this particular philosophy, is to be concerned with this. Okay? What do you mean by that? That's one of the big questions. What do you mean by that? Okay? And what kind of a statement is that? You've heard those phrases before, right? What kind of a statement is that? And so you begin to get an idea is that, and this is how we get into those Bible studies. Well, what do you think this means to you? Okay? So this means that philosophy has come to be conceived as an activity rather than a theory or a body of knowledge. Okay. Now there's a guy by the name of Ludwig, and I mentioned him before in our previous class. Okay, in our last semester, which was Wittgenstein, and Ludwig, he put it this way. He said, the result of philosophy is not a number of philosophical propositions, but to make the propositions clear. So now there have been two major stages, okay, of analytical philosophy, okay, in the 20th century, which have held their own all the way through into the 21st century. Now the first one is what we call militant, right? It was a militant stage in which the philosophers were aggressive and even dogmatic, okay, in all of their presentations and in their teachings, okay. So this was the stage that was associated particularly with the label called logical positivism. Logical positivism. You know, what did you just say? Logical positivism, okay? It's a movement that set up a rather rigid standards of meaningfulness, okay? So you go, well, what's logical positivism, okay? So positivism, okay? It was later on it was called logical empiricism, okay? Both which together are also known as neo-positivism, okay? It's a movement in Western philosophy again, okay, whose central thesis was what they call the verification principle, also known as it's also known as the variability or criterion of meaning. Now, the theory of knowledge, okay, asserted that only statements, listen to this carefully, that only statements, okay, verifiable through the direct observation or logical proof are meaningful. Let me repeat that for you, okay? Because you're about to, if you already missed half of what I said already, you're about to miss this even further. And so what they say is that the theory of knowledge asserted that only statements verifiable through direct observation or logical proof are meaningful. So starting in the late 1920s, okay, groups of philosophers and groups of scientists, okay, and mathematicians formed what was called the Berlin Circle, like in Berlin, Germany, the Berlin Circle and the Vienna Circle, as in Vienna in Austria, okay. And so they had the Berlin Circle and the Vienna Circle, okay, in which these two cities, okay, would propound the ideas of logical positivism, okay, which is, now you go, what are you talking about? Well, if the main statement here is, okay, that the theory of knowledge asserts that only those statements that are verifiable through direct observation or logical proof are meaningful, then you've just discounted 99.99% of the Word of God in the Bible. So then we ask the question, what do you mean by legal positivism? Okay, what is that? Well, let me help you with that. As I said earlier to you, legal positivism is also called, okay, logical empiricism, okay, empirical knowledge, right? This is scientific, right? And so it's a philosophical movement that arose in Vienna again in the 1920s and was characterized primarily by the view that scientific knowledge, okay, is the only kind of factual knowledge. And that all traditional metaphysical doctrines are to be rejected as completely meaningless. And this is where the movement started, where the Bible got thrown out of schools all over the United States. Okay? And slowly but surely same thing began to happen throughout the Western Anglosphere world. This is where it began to happen. Okay? And you go, oh, that's where this starts. Yes. which is the reason why you struggle with people coming to your church today in the 21st century, and they've been raised on this. And so when they hear you preach and teach, you just talking about fairy tales and fables and myths and so forth, okay? And so you need to grasp this idea where this comes from. Now, according to this view, right, there are only two types of meaningful languages. Okay? Number one, mathematical, what they call mathematical logical truths, in which the predicate is contained within the subject, such as, for example, the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. Okay? And this is taught greatly in algebra, geometry. Okay? You see this being, and this is the kind of thinking that gets you into. Okay? And then the second one is what they call empirical truths. Empirical truth. Now you go, well, Brother Eddie, why are you saying this? Because you see, this is where 99.99% of our people come from. They come from that kind of educational system into the church. Okay? But you, preacher, you have no clue who you're talking to and why they reject what you're saying. But they just sit there and they go like this. Their heads go up and down. But inside they're going, no way, Jose. Okay? So you need to grasp where this comes from, because this is why we have preachers now in the pulpits who actually teach this way. And they'll tell you that everything is a story in the Bible now. Which is why we have all these guys who sit in a stool now, and they got a t-shirt and jeans and sneakers on and tennis shoes, and they sell stories. Okay, and they try to relate it to something that is terrestrial on this ground. So the empirical truth is such as the book is on the table. You look at the table, the book is on the table. Yep, that's empirical. It's observable. I can see that. Okay, so empirical truths in this philosophy are propositions. Okay, that are verifiable by sense data. And since 90% of what you read in the Word of God is not verifiable by sense data, okay, it's to be excluded. So these are the only meaningful types of language. Basically, what you're doing is you're going to church to be entertained, okay? And for them, all other propositions, that is, propositions which are neither mathematical type, okay, nor are they empirical or scientific type statements that can be verified by sense data, are literally nonsense, meaningless. This is how we arrive at this kind of thinking. And then there's also this thing called pseudo propositions. And what they're saying is that really all these things most of these preachers are talking about, they're actually pseudo propositions, okay? They're actually pseudo propositions. Excuse me. So they fall into this category, okay, of expressive language. So, man, that preacher's really expressive, okay? And that's what they're talking about, okay? Like the arts, right? The arts is expressive language, okay? They express the emotions of the speaker or the writer, which is why these guys get in the pulpit and they're just basically entertainers, okay? It's the force of the statement. The force of the statement, like the universe is actually mental rather than material. You know what? But that sells, okay? It's more like, ouch, hooray, okay? It's like, then it is like the book is on the table. That's observable, the book on the table, okay? So the language of metaphysics, which is the Bible, okay? The language of ethics, the language of theology, okay? And many other time-honored disciplines, okay, was consigned to logical positivism to this status. This is how we arrive at where we are today, okay, in this particular kind of analytical philosophy, which is invading the church today. We'll pick this up in our next session.